Hello everyone and welcome once again to the MoeGamer podcast. Chris is back with me today, so you don't have to listen to me rambling on for half an hour about porn on Steam. So, hey Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How's everybody out there today?
Not too bad. I'm very hot again. Summer, it seems, has arrived here, which has made life very, very sweaty indeed.
Yeah, I don't know how it is for you guys in the UK, but it seems like spring is just a thing that doesn't exist anymore.
I was thinking that the other day. It's just we seem to go from freezing cold and wet to roasting sunshine and nothing in between, and sometimes both on the same day at the moment. So yeah, that's always fun. Anyway, so today we're getting back to our usual format since we're both here to talk about things. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about the news, then we'll move on to talking about what we've been playing recently, and then finally we will move on to our main topic for the episode, which today we're going to be talking a little bit about game preservation and historical compilations and that sort of thing. Before we dive too deeply into the news, I just want to give a bit of an update on the situation I talked a bit about in the last episode with the Steam visual novel VNpocalypse, Waifu Holocaust, or whatever you want to call it. People getting very pissy about the various things that people are calling it, but you know, the important thing is the situation. So it's I wouldn't say it's completely resolved as yet, but most of the developers who got contacted in that whole flurry of threats to get their content taken down unless they edit it, most of them have been contacted by Valve to say that their products are going to be re-reviewed and that the original message was probably sent in error, which suggests to me that one of the theories going around that it was just someone mass reporting anything with sort of vaguely anime art style graphics was probably the most accurate one, but no one has sort of had any sort of definitive yes, this is fine from Valve as yet. But also no one has had any stuff taken down either, so that's good news. The other good news that's come of that is the fact that lots of other stores and publishers and companies have stepped up to the plate to try and compete with Steam in this sort of space. Up until now, your two real choices for visual novels have been going to Steam for all ages versions or going direct to the publishers for adults only versions where they exist. And there's been a few other sites like Nutaku and Denpasoft and a few other places around that specialise particularly in the adults-only side of things. But as a result of this Steam business, GOG.com has stepped up and started publishing visual novels from companies like Sekai Project and MoeGamer. Those are the all-ages versions again. Most importantly, on that GOG situation is that GOG have said they have absolutely no issue whatsoever with publishers offering uncensoring patches. So those companies that release a cut all ages version on a platform like GOG and then provide a free content patch, or in some cases a paid content patch to add in the adult content again, GOG are absolutely fine with that, whereas Steam have been a bit funny about that in the past. So that's good.
So I've also recently discovered an itch.
Yes.
And I noticed that itch straight up has, when I was configuring my settings, I just signed up for it yesterday, they specifically had to do you want adult content to appear in your regular feed, yes or no. So I believe they straight up will distribute adult content.
That's good, yeah. I know itch is very popular with Western indie developers in particular, and it seems that they're really trying to grow now that there's been this controversy over Steam. I think they're trying to put together a full-on client as well, so a client piece of software like Steam, so you don't just do everything through their website. So yeah, that's going to be interesting to see where things go. GOG's already got a client. I think Nutaku and MoeGamer are both working on something as well. Around the same time as this whole situation hit, MoeGamer suggested in a press release that they're currently working on something, but didn't really say what. Whether that's their partnership with GOG or something more than that remains to be seen. But either way, it's better news than it was last time. So, all right. So that's all that. So let's jump into the news stories you've picked out for us today, then.
Yes. So I will get the thing that enthuses me most out of the way first, which is we finally have a solid release date for Mega Man 11.
Yes.
Now, I have in recent history made a distinct effort to cut myself out of social networking because I'm tired of the noise. So I don't know whether people are excited about Mega Man 11 or not, or whether or not people who don't understand making video games have a problem with the art style or not, but I think it looks great. I'm also very happy to see that they are introducing a new mechanic to the game, what they are calling the double gear system, which seems to be a system where you can either slow down time or power yourself up to do extra damage with like a bar that recharges, and if you don't watch the bar, you can overheat. So there's a whole new wrinkle in the Mega Man mechanics, which is very, very exciting. I mean, not a whole heck of a lot else besides it's Mega Man, 3D graphics on a 2D plane. And early October 2nd is now the solid release date. If you are looking at the Switch version, which I know I am, there is going to be a special edition box set that is to celebrate Mega Man's 30th anniversary. That's coming with a very handsome Mega Man 30th anniversary amiibo with like a little silver medal on the base. I don't have any amiibo. That may finally be the first amiibo I get because it's a really nice dynamic action pose, and I'm a sucker for anything remotely Mega Man related.
Oh, great. Yeah, this looks pretty great. To be honest, I haven't seen a whole lot of discussion about it on social media. I don't know if that's just the people I follow or if there hasn't really been a lot of discussion of it. The trailer seemed to sort of slip out quite quietly, if anything. I saw a few people discussing it on Discord, but I haven't seen a lot about it on Twitter, so there certainly hasn't been any sort of big negative response or anything like that. So,
that's good.
Which is good. Yeah, I mean, my first impressions of it were very good. It reminded me quite a bit of what Mighty Number 9 was supposed to look like.
Yes, yeah, very much so. I thought the same thing.
Yeah, so if you remember the original concept screenshot for Mighty Number 9, which the final game didn't end up looking like, which is fine. If you've read my coverage on it, you're going to know that Mighty Number 9 is actually a lot better game than people give it credit for, but the whole Kickstarter thing tended to overshadow the actual quality of the game. But yeah, this looks really nice. The trailer's got some nice teasers in it. It's got some really nice big bosses in it. The animation looks great. There's this sort of nice cel shading thing going on with the graphics. Yeah, the art style looks very sort of true to sort of the 2D non-game depictions of Mega Man we've had, things like box art and stuff like that. It looks very true to that, which is nice.
Yeah, the thing I'm most excited about, as an art guy and a visual presentation guy, is and this was something that was revealed way back when the game was first teased months ago. But I love now that apparently when you switch the weapons, it's not just a color change. There's actual subtle changes to Mega Man's overall appearance. So
yeah, that's cool.
They think the one they keep showing is like like Brickman or whatever the bad guy's gonna end up being. Like when you use his ability, like Mega Man's helmet takes on that like a crisscross brick pattern, and like the Buster looks like it's like a cylinder of bricks instead of the regular Buster. So I'm really excited to see like the other like subtle transformations, which is really something like that is very difficult to achieve with 2D because you have to redraw the entire sprite over and over.
Yeah.
So basically it's just skins now that it's a 3D engine. So really cool. Very excited to see like the 8 different little transformations.
Yeah, looking forward to this. I mean, ever since I spent that month covering Inti Creates games, obviously they're not quite the same as Mega Man, but there's a lot of inspiration in there for obvious reasons. Yeah, I've become very interested in what Mega Man's doing, and at some point I will go back and investigate the series as a whole. So, but it's good to see that it's still moving on, and it's also good, I think, that they're not getting too hung up on the NES thing as well, because I mean that was cool, but it's also nice to see them trying something a bit more modern with it as well. So
yeah, I'm very excited that they're kind of making a modern Mega Man game that happens to be 2D.
Yeah,
and taking it in directions with presentation and mechanics that would only be possible with modern engines, but still very much keeping it close. It's kind of what I've always hoped for from a new Mega Man title. So hopefully it doesn't disappoint in October.
Good stuff. Fingers crossed for that then. Okay then, next up we have a story about a new Sonic racing game coming this winter. So it's called Team Sonic Racing. So they appear to have dropped the Sega All-Stars bit from the title, which was one of the most appealing elements of the previous versions for many people. So it sounds like most of this game is going to be involving the Sonic universe rather than the sort of extended Sega universe. But yeah, what do you think of this?
Well, yeah, I'm excited. Most importantly is that Sumo Digital's making it again,
yes.
Which is the developer who made not only the last 2 Sonic racing games, which were fantastic, but also they did the modern Outruns for Sega, and their racing output in general has been solid for many years.
Well, aside from that as well, they also worked on, or members of that team anyway, used to be involved with Bizarre Creations as well.
Yes,
so a lot of them worked on things like Project Gotham Racing and Blur, which is a fantastic game that no one played. But yeah, they've got a great pedigree there, so that's one thing that I'm very excited about.
Yeah, I mean, and as far as I was slightly disappointed to see the Sega All-Stars element dropped, but I'm not one of those people that like hates on Sonic. So like I like all of Sonic's like different friends and stuff. So I'm actually hoping they take this opportunity to bring some of the other weird guys back, like the alligator whose name I don't remember, or like they just reintroduced Mighty the Armadillo for Sonic Mania Plus. So maybe he's going to be in it. I don't know, Charmy the Bee. There's like all kinds of cool weird Sonic characters that we don't get to see. And if ditching the weird All-Stars aspect means I don't have to look at weird Uncanny Valley Danica Patrick anymore, like I'm also super okay with that, because I did not enjoy that in the previous game.
Yeah, that was just weird. There was kind of an era of a few games doing that, and it was around sort of the same time that we had the Mercedes sponsorship in Mario Kart as well, wasn't it? It was like, well, what are you doing? Stop it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this. The last couple of Sonic Racing games have been fantastic. I spent a lot of time with Sonic Racing Transformed in particular. It's a really nice game, great music, excellent single player mode. It absolutely craps all over Mario Kart in terms of single player. Multiplayer, I've struggled to get people to enthuse about it as much as Mario Kart, but to be honest, that's not a huge problem because the single player offering is so substantial. And in this case, it sounds like it's going to be even more substantial. They're talking about sort of adventure mode, which brings to mind images of things like Diddy Kong Racing on the N64, which is something I really like the approach they took in that. So if they do something along those lines, yeah, this is going to be a really interesting game, I think. Yeah,
I'm very excited. You'll certainly have at least one person to play it online with.
Excellent. All right, what you got next for us?
What do I got next? Do we want to talk about Pokemon? I guess we got to talk about Pokemon.
Sure, let's talk about Pokemon.
All right, so Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee arriving November 16th, 2018. Really interesting stuff here. What the two Let's Go titles appear to be is a modern recreation in a lot of ways of the original Pokemon Yellow. So we're going back to the original Pokemon region, but they're not quite like standard Pokemon RPGs in a traditional sense. They're actually combining the functionality of Pokemon Go with the console game. What a lot of people are theorizing is that this is meant to be kind of a bridge the gap kind of title to start getting people who kind of came on board with Pokemon thanks to Pokemon Go used to the idea of more traditional Pokemon games. It's kind of a hybrid of the two approaches. So it doesn't control traditionally. When you actually play the game on your Switch, you've got to use the motion controls to throw the Pokeball. So it's kind of got some modern stuff from Pokemon Go melded with a more traditional Pokemon experience. It does have what appear to be more traditional Pokemon battle sequences in the game. There's also some crossability with the actual Pokemon Go cell phone game. When you reach a certain point in the Let's Go games, you'll actually be able to pull your Pokemon from Pokemon Go into your Switch game. So that's kind of cool. There's also going to be a really neat Pokeball accessory where the little button in the middle of the Pokeball is actually a full analog. So you can use that as a controller when you play the Let's Go game. It'll sync up with your Switch. And then you can actually load your Pokemon from your game into the ball and then take them with you, like those old Let's Go Pikachu accessories.
Yeah.
So it's just really interesting stuff. As kind of a core Pokemon guy, like I have no interest in playing it, but from a pure design perspective, it's really cool to see them kind of reaching out, trying to touch other audiences whose familiarity with Pokemon may come from other places besides the core RPGs.
Yeah, I think it's good, and I think it's good they're trying to sort of spread things out with Pokemon a bit, because they've just released that free-to-play Pokemon Quest thing as well on Switch.
I haven't got a chance to check that out, but I like the art style.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet either, but people seem to be enjoying it, and this, as you say, is a sort of bridge the gap effort, which I think is a really good idea. It's got I believe it's got cooperative play in it as well, hasn't it? So like two people can join battles at the same time.
Yeah, on the same screen, like couch co-op.
Yeah, so that's going to be great for example, parents to play with their kids and stuff, which will be good. So it's sort of bringing in that traditional Nintendo philosophy of getting people together to play stuff and enjoy things and software toys and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, you know me, I've never been hugely into Pokemon, but I find the concept of this quite interesting, and I follow quite a few people who are into Pokemon, and they seem pretty excited about this. So, especially the Eevee one.
Yes, that's really cool. And like, for those of you who like are huge into like Pokemon lore, right? Like, it's cool that it's Pikachu or Eevee, because like traditionally in like the comics and stuff, like the rival character, like the hero has Pikachu, but the rival has Eevee. So if you actually think of it, depending on which copy you buy, you're actually choosing to be the hero character or the rival character.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is kind of an interesting twist. Also, of course, part of all the news that was announced for Let's Go is that there is another core RPG coming.
Yes.
So we don't know anything about it. We haven't even technically announced platforms, but they have said that mobility and on the go is going to be an important part of that game's design philosophy. So it's got some people theorizing whether or not it is going to be on Switch or still be on the 3DS, or what the heck is going on.
It's hard to say at this point, really, because I mean, obviously 3DS is starting to wind down a bit, but Nintendo does seem pretty committed to continuing to support it for at least another year or two. But at the same time, the Switch has got plenty of portability in its own right as well. So
sure,
yeah, it's kind of hard to say at this point. But yeah, anyone who's whingered about this can just wait until next year and see what's going on there.
Yeah.
All right. So next up, we've got news that Yakuza 3, 4, and 5 are all getting remastered versions on PlayStation 4, and moreover, these remastered versions apparently exist specifically because of the Western audience for the game, which has made a lot of people very happy, because Yakuza was previously thought of as something that Sega in the West didn't really care about all that much, so it was always a really nice surprise when they finally got released, and there was always a bit of cynicism about when a new one was announced in Japan. It's like, oh, we're never going to get that one. Although we've got all of them now, so, you know, shut up. But yeah, this is really great news, because Yakuza 3, 4, and 5 are all really great games. Yakuza 5, I can't remember the situation in America, but certainly in Europe it never got a physical release. So it's going to be really nice to be able to have an actual copy of that on my shelf. I've got 3, 4, and Dead Souls here on PS3, but at the very least I will pick up a disc-based copy of Yakuza 5 PS4. It sounds like they're not going to be sort of full-on Kiwami-style remakes of them, but rather remasters with a few enhancements. So they're going to be running at full 1080p resolution. They're going to be 60 frames a second. They're going to have a bit of extra content. They're going to have a few things tweaked here and there to sort of apparently being more in line with the moral values of modern Japan or something like that, which has made a few people raise their eyebrows a bit, but. Yeah, so I'm very much looking forward to those. Yakuza is a series that I've enjoyed a great deal since the PS2 era, even with that awful dub of the first one. Honestly, you've never heard the word motherfucker so many times in one game.
I hate when games like try to be edgy by just inserting curse words into the dialogue.
It's insane, because like you play the Japanese versions of Yakuza and everyone's like sort of really polite and respectful to one another, and then the first one on PS2 is just like fuck, shit, fuck you. And it's like
yeah, you know they're not actually
but anyway, yeah, so I'm looking forward to playing through all of those. I've actually only beaten up to Yakuza 3 so far to date, despite owning the other ones. I never got around to the later ones yet, so this seems like an ideal opportunity to jump on board, particularly with how well received Zero and the two Kiwamis have been so far. So.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with the Yakuza games is slim. Actually, my first one I've ever played was Kiwami. I just kind of let them slip under the radar for a long time. But I'm as we'll talk about today later in the episode, in terms of historical preservation and whatnot, I'm just excited that even though I may not buy them all, it's just great that they're all unified on a modern platform and they're going to be readily available to everybody. I mean, that hurts no one. So it's great news.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if it's going to bring some new people into the series and help it grow and continue over time as well, that's great too. So, all right, great stuff. What else you got for us? Anything?
Just two little things. Don't need to turn into huge conversations, but I'm a huge Warhammer fan. Not a fan of the tabletop game necessarily because I just don't have the money and time for it, but I love the lore and I like to read the books and I like to keep in touch with whatever's going on in the Warhammer and Warhammer 40k universes. So I was really excited to see this week that they announced a new game set in the medieval Warhammer universe called Warhammer Chaos Bane, and it's going to be a Diablo-style action RPG set in the Warhammer fantasy world, which is a first. There hasn't been like a good crack at an action RPG set in that setting yet.
But that's really weird when you think about it, isn't it? Because
there has been one set in the 40k universe, but from what I understand, it didn't turn out too good. But this is a different developer, so I can't wait to get my hands on it. I love Warhammer, so there's not really a lot of details about it besides the developer, but it was a French studio, Echo Software, who made How to Survive 1 and 2, which I never played myself, but they were quite well received when they came out, from what I understand.
Yeah, no, I remember people saying positive things about them. So, yeah, this is going to be interesting. I think it's Games Workshop have been very very liberal with the Warhammer license, farming it out to all sorts of different developers to do different things with, and I think that's really good because there's so many different approaches you can take with it, because you can do a very strict adaptation of the tabletop rules for people who want that, but then there's sort of just using the lore and the units and the stories and so on, and some of them have been more successful than others. Some of them different people react to in different ways. Like, for example, I kind of respected what Vermintide was doing, but I didn't enjoy it all that much. But I've got friends who are obsessed with it and that sort of thing. So, yeah, this is going to be a sort of another string to Warhammer's bow. So it's going to be good to see that, different people who are entered Warhammer for different reasons will be counted to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly excited about it because I really love Warhammer, like I mentioned, but often it just so happens that whenever a new Warhammer or Warhammer 40k game comes out, it's always in a genre that I don't like.
Yeah.
So, like, even though I love Warhammer and games is a really good way for me to interact with that property, there's been very few Warhammer games that are actually games I want to play. So, like, a Diablo-style action RPG, hopefully with a focus on loot, like, that's my jam. So, like, I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yeah. I also had another little game I just wanted to give a shout out to and point people in the direction of, which is a title called Blackbird, which is going to be available for Switch and on Steam. It is a title from Yoshiro Kimura, who is known for kind of his super oddball games. Tulip on the PS2, which is a game about, like, kissing people. and lately Million Onion Hotel was a cell phone game he had made. He also made that game, I can't remember the title of it, but it was about, like, being like a game developer and making your own games.
Oh yeah, was it Dandy Dungeon or something?
Yeah, that's
like
it, Dandy Dungeon. And both Million Onion Hotel and Dandy Dungeon were really good takes on cell phone games, like really eminently playable, quirky, interesting games. This Blackbird is kind of his take on a horizontal shooter with kind of goofy, kind of weird cartoony graphics, but with like a sepia tone, like very strange visual presentation. It appears to be kind of grim in that, like, the characters you shoot, like, the bodies don't go away. They just, like, fall and, like, stay there in the stage. but it has, like a cute pixel art fairy tale look to it, but then it's also, like, gruesome. So it's a classic Kimura, like, kind of sarcastic with a weird presentation. So I just wanted to make sure that was on people's radars.
Yeah, it looks really nice as well. It's a sort of combining that with pixel art is a really interesting look, and then you got these odd flashes of color with the colored balloons and stuff as well. So yeah, looks lovely. All right, great stuff. So that's, I think, all the stuff we wanted to talk about from the news in the last couple of weeks. So we're going to take a short break now, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about what we've been playing for the last couple of weeks. So I'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. So for our second segment today, as usual, we're going to be talking a little bit about the things we've been playing for the last couple of weeks. And I think probably the first thing we both want to bring up is one Switch release that has proven rather popular among us, which is Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. So first reactions, please, because I know you didn't play the Wii U version, whereas
Yes.
I played that quite extensively. So I'm quite keen to hear your first reactions to it.
I'm enjoying it quite a bit. I mean, as you said, I did not play the Wii U version or the DS version because I'm one of those guys that gets angry about DLC. So when the Wii U version was announced and it was like, oh, DLC pack's coming, I was like, I just won't buy this game. I'll wait till there's a definitive edition. so now there is a definitive edition, right, with every character from both versions, every adventure map from both versions. Like, it's been a long time since I can name a game that's this packed with content. Like, you could just buy this game and play this game, like, all year. And, like, not buy another game. It's, like, crazy how much stuff there is.
Yeah, it's insane. There is so much to do. I absolutely love this game. I loved it on the Wii U. It's one of my favourite games on the Wii U. And I was a little worried about getting on the Switch, worried about sort of it being too similar. But having not played the 3DS version... there is definitely enough in this new version to warrant another purchase, even if you engage quite heavily with the Wii U version, because it's got all of the sort of gameplay enhancements from the 3DS version, like being able to switch characters mid-battle. It's got the additional stories for some of the characters like Linkle and Sia. It's got things like being able to command your troops around the place. It's got all these additional adventure maps, as you say. So yeah, there's just so much stuff in this game. And what I really like about it is that there's so many different ways to play as well. So if you just want to play it through and have a cool story, then there's the legend mode where you can follow the main story and fight bosses and all that sort of thing. And then there's all the challenge modes if you just want to carve your way through a horde of enemies against a time limit. And then there's this adventure mode, which is just a really fascinating approach to this sort of thing, because it's got so many varied challenges in it, ranging from answering quiz questions by defeating the right enemy to sort of clearing out a particular number of enemies before a time expires, or doing more traditional warrior style battles and so on. So yeah, I absolutely love this game.
Yeah, it's really good so far. One of the things I really like about it, coming as a guy who has had a fair share of experiences with Musou titles, and the different Warriors games. Specifically, I like to play more of the licensed Warriors games over like the traditional Sengoku Air China Musou games, but I play a lot of the licensed ones. It is almost immediately apparent that this was developed by Team Ninja and not the standard Omega Force team that develops all the usual Musou games, because it's so much quicker and snappier and more responsive.
Yeah.
It really feels a lot more accessible and less plodding than other Musou games do. It's really refreshing to play.
Yeah,
it's almost arcadey.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, sort of things like that. I mean, I haven't really seriously played another Warriors game for quite a while. I played a bit of Dynasty Warriors 8, I think. Whatever the one before the one no one liked was. And I can't remember whether there were things like the weak point gauge and stuff like that in those. Whereas in this, there's just like a very strong focus on being flashy all the time and sort of doing ridiculous special moves, and there's like at least 3 different ways to do ridiculous cinematic special moves in this, rather than just pressing the Musou button in this. So you've got things like breaking enemies' guards, and you've got the magic attacks, and you've got the special move button and so on. And each and every one of those characters handles very, very distinctly and very differently as well, which is quite pleasing. And even there's 3 different versions of Link in there, but they are all very different from each other. So you've got the main sort of Hyrule Warriors Link, who is pretty generic in terms of how he handles these sort of hacks and slashes and does that sort of thing. And then you've got Child Link from Majora's Mask, who has the ability to transform using the Fierce Deity Mask from that, which means he can sort of turn into a very powerful form of himself for limited periods of time. And then you've got Toon Link from Wind Waker as well, who is kind of rubbish at what he does, but in a charming way. So like anytime he does a sort of special attack or a spin attack, he gets really dizzy and tired and stuff, so you have to take that into account when you're doing those moves with him. And then beyond that, you've got really weird characters like Wizro, who kind of handles like a bullet hell character, and you've got range characters, you've got characters who are really quick, you've got characters who are sort of slow, plodding, heavy hitters, and so on. So yeah, there's a ton of variety, and the game encourages you to try them out, both through the story mode and through the adventure mode as well.
Wizro kind of reminds me of what it might be like to control Emil if there was a Nier Warriors.
Yeah, definitely. He takes a bit of getting used to, but yeah, and one thing I really like is the progression kind of encourages you to experiment a bit with the characters as you unlock new combos with them, and you'll often find completely by accident that there are certain combos and abilities that you can use that will be massively effective against enemies that might be giving you a bit of grief. Like, for example, when I first started playing, I didn't really rate Sheik as a character for anything other than sort of being quick and hacking away at things, but just one of the adventure mode missions I did the other night is one that keeps throwing Manhandler bosses at you repeatedly. And Manhandler is weak against fire attacks, and Sheik conveniently has a combo that infuses her next strong attack with fire. It absolutely devastates Manhandlers, and that was such a pleasure to discover that sort of thing, and it's far from the first thing that I discovered in that way while playing the game, and I doubt it's going to be the last one either.
This game's very good at something that I think all the Musou games are good at that people tend to ignore, which is that anyone can pick them up and hack and slash away, but then there are rich mechanics to discover. Like, the more time you want to spend with it, the more it rewards you for that time.
Yes, definitely. So, I mean, going through the main story, you'll probably get a couple of characters up into the sort of level 30, level 40 or so on. The level cap on this game is 255. And then
some Disgaea level stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, you've got that level of grinding of experience. There's a nice mechanic where you can expend your rupees to level up lower level characters to match your higher level ones. But then on top of that, there's quite an extensive metagame in terms of collecting weapons and fusing them together to get skills and that sort of thing as well. So the sort of eventual end game goal of the game, if you like, is to get everyone's ultimate weapon, which is sort of their third tier weapon for each of the different weapon classes they can do with the optimum combination of skills on it. So there are very extensive theory crafting guides on the internet of how to do that, of how best to grind your way through that. But there's also a lot of sort of customizability in that. So if you don't feel like that's the combination of skills that you're interested in having, then yeah, you can customize that by collecting weapons. So there's a nice sort of loot aspect to the whole thing as well. So it's got so much stuff that just appeals to such a broad range of players, and it's a game I suspect is not going to get talked about very much, unfortunately. But yeah, everyone I know who has been playing it has been absolutely loving it. So
yeah, it's quite a good time. I don't love it in handheld mode. I think the screen is a bit cramped and the text is a bit small.
Yes, but I'd agree with that. And it also doesn't perform quite as well in handheld mode as well. It's the first Switch game I've had where the handheld mode is noticeably lower frame rate than docked mode. Mm-hmm. But I mean that's not a deal breaker or anything for me, because in handheld mode it performs pretty much like the Wii U version did, but with smaller text. But yeah, it's just really nice to have that game on the go when I want it, because the variety of the missions means that you don't have to spend half an hour to 45 minutes doing a full-on Dynasty Warriors style battle. There's plenty of stuff in adventure mode that takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes to do. So
sure.
All right. So anything else to say on Hyrule Warriors?
Oh, I think you covered pretty much everything. It's been a long time since I encountered a game that was that much worth the price of admission.
Oh,
out of the gate.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, that's going to be on the sort of on a continuously ongoing game for me for quite some time. I think I'm going to try and devote some time to it on MoeGamer in the near future, because, as I say, it's a great game that's been well received, but with it being a Warriors game, it's not something that sort of the mainstream press is particularly interested in, because they all assume that Warriors games are sitting around pressing the Y button for 500 years. Whereas we all know that's not quite true.
Yeah, well, I feel the original Wii U version got a really positive reception, even in the mainstream press, because people were actually surprised at a lot of the quality of life and like fun improvements that were made to it over standard Musou games. Yeah. Like, I remember reading articles about the original Wii U version from people who had previously been quite harsh on the Warriors games, liking it quite a bit, and how surprised they were that it was a quality game. So I just think people now aren't writing about the definitive version, because really definitive versions never get a lot of lip service.
No, that's true, and I mean, which is sort of unfortunate, really, because the previous one, the Wii U version, as positive as a reception as it got, it was a Wii U game, so only certain people are going to be interested in reading about that in the first place. So because of that console's small install base. So now it's on Switch. It seems like an ideal opportunity to sort of share the good word of it, but yeah, as you say, because it's a definitive edition, because it's a re-release, it's probably unlikely to get that treatment, unless you're me, of course. So there we go.
More power to you.
All right, so what else have you been playing recently?
I'm still kind of stuck in that weird place in my life. It almost like feels post breakup. Like I still haven't recovered from finishing Xenoblade 2. so I've just been like flitting from like game to game, and like nothing's really been attaching to me. I guess over the past couple weeks, what I've played the most is besides Hyrule Warriors, obviously, the Switch version of Battle Chasers Nightwar finally came out. I was a Kickstarter backer for that back in the day. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Joe Madura is a very talented comic book artist, one of my personal heroes, who was very well known in the 90s for his specific... I mean, he did work for... he's done work for DC and Marvel and stuff, but one of the things he's most known for is his personal comic, Battle Chasers, which takes place in what he calls an arcane punk setting. So it's got the hallmarks of steampunk, like there's machinery and stuff, but it's all powered by magic instead of being powered by like steam and science. So you've got this really cool medieval world, which is highly inspired by his respect for anime. But so there's magic and machinery and his art style, which is extremely distinct. But the Battle Chasers Nightwar came about after the dissolving of Vigil Games, which was Madura's development house that had made the first two Darksiders games, which are also hit by his design. And once that whole business happened with THQ dissolving, Vigil dispersed. Some of the Vigil people went on to work for THQ and are currently working on the new Darksiders. The other people from the Vigil team went on to found Airship Syndicate, which is Madura's new development team. So they decided they were going to make a new RPG with mechanics that are designed specifically to pay tribute to like the classic 90s eras RPGs we all love, but set in the Battle Chasers comic universe. So it's really interesting. The battle sequences are what you would kind of associate with classic Final Fantasy games. Characters stand in rows on left or right sides of the screen and just exchange turn-based blows. But it does have a very distinctly Western sensibility as well. Dungeons randomly generate their layouts. There's a heavy focus on loot, which is color-coded in an MMO fashion. So, there's green loot, blue loot, orange loot, all the way up to like white epic loot or whatever. It's all... So there's a high Western sensibility paired with the JRPG style combat sequences. It's a really interesting game, and I'm enjoying it quite a bit.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. As I've spoken to you offline about this, I wasn't really familiar with Battle Chasers in generally, or the work of the guy whose name I've forgotten already.
Joe Madura.
Yes. But yes, I mean, I really enjoyed the Darksiders games. Those were very good, and so the sound of this game just does sound very interesting. As you say, this blend of East and West, so you sort of JRPG style combat. I've seen things like are there things like dialogue trees and stuff in towns as well for quests and stuff like that?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems like an interesting approach, and a lot of Western developed RPGs over the last few years have left me a bit cold, but there've been a few that I've really liked, and those have been the ones that have kind of combined different elements together.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, a lot of people are big on Divinity now because of the last couple of ones, Original Sin and so on.
Sure.
That were really good. I played the original Divine Divinity back in the day when that first came out, and that was a really interesting blend of sort of Baldur's Gate style exploration and character interaction and stuff with Diablo style action RPG combat. And that was not something I'd seen combined together before, but it really can work. I think there's this sort of assumption that if you take one particular type of mechanic, then you need to sort of make the whole game fit that kind of mechanic as well. Whereas you can come up with some really interesting experiences if you kind of combine things together. And it sounds like this one's done a really good job of this.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very successful in doing what it wants to do. I mean, I do have some complaints about it. It's not a perfect game by any means. One thing that I think will turn a lot of people off on it. I don't have a problem with this. It's actually something I specifically like in games, but it has a very like plodding, deliberate pacing to it. And that extends to like everything. Like the combat is extremely slowly paced. It's not action. It feels like an old game. There's also like it's too in love with text. Not in the way that I complain about like visual novels, but like if you are in combat, like you have so many different attacks, and like the description of what each attack does is like a small paragraph.
Yeah.
Like doing this creates this much mana recharge while dealing this much damage to this many enemies, and then creates a shield for this character. Like all the attacks are very complicated, so like it's a heavily strategic game, and like every choice you make is a lot more deliberate than just like hammering on attack, which is something JRPGs sometimes get a lot of flack for. So it's a very deliberate, very heavily strategic game.
But that side of things is very typically Western, I think, and it sounds like it's taken in quite a bit of inspiration from board games in some ways. Would that be accurate?
It feels like a tabletop game when you play it, actually, because the majority of the game actually takes place on the map screen.
Right.
So you move around on the map screen from like location to location and like load up the dungeons and stuff. But like the main town is just on the map screen. Like you don't go into town. Like the buildings are just on the map.
Right, I get you. Yeah.
So it does feel like a tabletop game in a lot of ways, actually.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. I mean, a couple of episodes back, I think I mentioned a game that me and some friends have been playing called Gloom Haven, which actually sounds very much like this. In that it's a tabletop game in that you have sort of a big overworld map that depicts where everything is and how far you'd have to travel to do things and so on. And you do stuff in town, but the stuff in town is all completely abstract. It's all sort of driven through tables and dice rolls and card draws and stuff like that. And then when you get into dungeons, those are generated through tiles and there's specific scenarios to do. All of your attacks, there are very few sort of basic attack actions in that. You have this hand of cards that you use, and most of those have some sort of either requirement on how you can use them, or range, or area of effect, or sort of this generates mana and you can then use that to do additional damage or whatever. So yeah, it sounds very much along that sort of thing. So I'll have to tell my friends about this because they're really enjoying Gloomhaven at the minute, and it sounds like they'll probably get a kick out of this as well. So.
It's almost the exact same thing. Like you go to a dungeon based on, you see the dungeon on the map, you go to the dungeon, you choose which difficulty level you want the dungeon to generate, which then dictates the quality of the loot you will receive from completing it, and then it randomly generates that dungeon out of a tile set.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, definitely an interesting one then. So yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it because I know you've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Yeah, well, I revere Joe Madura with an almost religious, from an almost religious standpoint. His art is one of the greatest inspirations for me throughout most of my young adult life. So to be able to interact with his stuff in a game is always great. And I love the first two Darksiders because of it, and I'm gonna engage with the third one even though he's not doing the character design because I still know it's based off the world he created. Yeah. He's just one of my favorite artists. Cool.
All right. So I've been playing a few other things recently. One of them is I've been getting back into the Shantae series, which I'm going to be covering this month on MoeGamer. So I'm not going to talk much about that now because there will be lots of articles about that coming up very soon. One thing I did want to talk about first, which will probably be of very little interest to you, but some of the people listening might be into it as well, is the visual novel that I finished recently called Supipara, which
I've heard of it.
Yeah, so this is a work published by MoeGamer, developed by a company called Minori. And Minori's sort of trademark is doing these beautifully presented visual novels. So rather than doing the standard sort of background with character sprites always facing the character on the screen, Minori takes a very sort of almost animated movie approach to them. So they're not fully animated in the same way as something like the School Days game is, but the game makes use of lots of different camera angles. It makes use of a true first-person perspective. So sometimes you have characters standing in front of you and you'll see the back of their heads, which is, you don't realize how unusual that is until you see it happening, especially in an anime style game. You very rarely see the back of an anime character's head, but in this you see it all the time. And it's just so wonderfully presented. It's a kinetic novel, so there's no choices or interactions or anything to make. It's just a straight line to the finish, straight through the story. But the whole aesthetic of it is just so gorgeous. It's all set in springtime, so the whole thing is sort of this sort of heavily bloomed sunlight is on everything. It's very, very colourful. It's got these very distinctive characters with sort of these very distinctive silhouettes and personalities, and the whole project, the whole Superpower project, is quite an interesting one, because the intention is for them to make 5 games in total. They've done 2 so far. This one I've been playing recently is the second chapter. I reviewed the first one a couple of years back. So the ultimate aim is for them to make 5 of these all together, and then they will all sort of tie together into a coherent story, but they also stand by themselves. It's kind of a similar approach to a multi-route visual novel, but there's also a supernatural aspect to it that I don't want to spoil too much for those who want to explore it, in that it sort of implies that rather than the routes being mutually exclusive to one another like they are in a normal visual novel, they might be sort of all happening at the same time, or that sort of thing. So there's a really interesting angle to the story with that. And rather than taking the usual crowdfunding approach with this, they are basically just ploughing all their profits from the currently available episodes of this and their other visual novel project called Eden, which is a sci-fi visual novel that I haven't checked out, but it's similarly beautifully presented. And yeah, so the remainder of the series happening is basically dependent on people picking up the first episodes, and its response to it has been very positive so far, with good reason, because it looks great, it sounds great, it's got good music, it's got a fascinating story that combines sort of a bit of slice of life with supernatural witchcraft and that sort of thing. And yeah, so if you haven't checked that out and you're a visual novel fan, I would very much encourage you to go and take a look at it. It's on Steam. It's also available via MoeGamer. It's an all ages one, so you don't have to worry about any content patches or 18 plus scenes or anything like that. You can just play it, enjoy it. It's lovely.
Sounds like it addresses one of my biggest things I don't care for in visual novels. Generally speaking, I find it hard to get past lower production values, so it's nice to hear that it's kind of got a unique presentation standard that's kind of different from the norm.
Yeah, as I say, that's very much Minori's trademark from what I can make out. They haven't had a lot of stuff localized to the West, but the stuff they have done has always been very roundly praised for looking and sounding absolutely great. So, and this is certainly no exception to that. So yeah, definitely high production values on this one. Alright, so I mean, you probably don't have a lot to say about that, but anything else you've been playing recently?
I mean, like I said, a bunch of stuff. I've been flitting back and forth between games. I've kind of been getting back into Pokemon again. Playing a little bit of Pokemon Sun, not too hardcore. The only other thing I've been playing kind of semi-seriously is I have the PS4 version of Dark Souls 2. I've got a bit of Dark Souls fever lately.
Okay.
What with the remaster of the first one coming out and stuff. I haven't bought the remaster of the first one because I'm trying not to spend as much money. But so I've been playing 2, which in typical fashion for you and I, it's the one a lot of people don't like, and I'm finding myself enjoying it quite a bit. But you know, Dark Souls is Dark Souls, so I don't know how much I can really talk about it that wouldn't cover ground that's been covered on every other media outlet ever. I just find the general atmosphere, great in the Dark Souls games, and pretty much the same things everyone else loves about them, I love about them. The minimalist, non-intrusive storytelling. Specifically in Dark Souls 2, I find it has a slightly different approach to atmosphere and scenery than 1 and 3 do. I find it to be a bit sadder and less horror focused and less oppressive. It's like a more it's a more depressing setting as composed to the other two, which are more of a fearful setting. I don't know if I'm kind of mincing words, but it just
I get what you mean.
Fundamentally different.
Yeah. No, I get what you mean. I mean, I haven't played the Souls series extensively. Every time I've tried, I've kind of bounced off them a bit, but not because I don't particularly like them, but just because I tend to run into other things that I'd rather be playing at the time. So I haven't found the right time for me to play a Souls game yet. I will say that of all the ones I've tried so far, which are Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and Dark Souls 2, I think Dark Souls 2 is, as you quite accurately say, the one that I have actually enjoyed the most so far. Dark Souls 2 is actually quite an interesting one because it's one of those ones that sort of public opinion seems to go back and forth on it quite a bit.
Yeah.
So like, you occasionally you'll see people slagging it off for all sorts of reasons, and then you'll see people going, "Oh, unpopular opinion, Dark Souls 2 is the best one." So I don't know really. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but
yeah, I mean,
there are people out there who like it. There are people out there who don't. I mean, you've got a whole series. If you don't dig Dark Souls 2, then go and play one of the other ones.
Yeah, well, yeah. Like I said, I'm just enjoying it because it feels a little different than the other ones. I like them all for different reasons, but one of the common theories is that Dark Souls 2 happens before 1 and 3.
Right.
So in 1 and 3, kind of shit's already gone down. Like everything's been destroyed, everybody's already dead, everything's at its darkest and worst because the world is about to end. Dark Souls 2, there's very much a feeling that this is still going on.
Right.
So there's still greenery, there's still sunshine, and the result is that there's kind of a pervasive feeling of sadness as opposed to a pervasive feeling of loss. Like there's still something to cling to, and in Dark Souls 2 it kind of feels like you still might be able to preserve some of what's good about the world, whereas in Dark Souls 1 and 3 it's kind of like the world's already over, fuck it. But like Dark Souls 2, it's like you reach the hub world and there's a beautiful seashore with like a golden sunshine. Like there feels in Dark Souls 2 like there's something to defend and that there's a sense that there's something to lose still. And so I kind of like that approach to the world. It resonates with me a little stronger than just the grimdark.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I might have reacted to that in the same way, because like I've always associated Dark Souls with the kind of sort of stereotypical grimdark aesthetic. It's like everything is grey and stone and splattered in blood and that sort of thing, whereas I played Dark Souls 2, and as you say, you get to that hub world and you got that lovely sort of golden sunset and so on, and when someone says Dark Souls 2, that is the image I get in my mind of that scene. Granted, I haven't played much further than that scene, so I don't have much else to relate to with Dark Souls, but yeah, that was sort of the most striking image that I took from the few hours I have spent with Dark Souls to date. One day I will play them properly, but as I say, I've never found quite the right time just yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're great games, and I'm finding I'm getting more out of playing 2 because I'm playing it completely separated from any buzz around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just enjoying it at my own pace, in my own way. You know, I'm a loot guy, so like to me, when I play Dark Souls, I spend forever in the same area, just killing every guy and trying to collect every sword and fiddling with upgrades, and you know, I like that there's no one shouting at me because I'm grinding and faffing around. Like I just have fun playing it at my own pace, and that's really the best way to play these games. Your way.
Yeah, sounds good to me. All right, great stuff. Anything else you want to bring up?
No, I think that's it for me.
All right, that's it for me as well. So, okay, we're going to take another short break now, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about our main topic of the episode, which is game preservation. So, we'll be back in a moment. Talk to you then. Welcome back. So for our third segment today, I wanted to talk a little bit about game preservation and the various things surrounding that. This is partly inspired by the recent release of the Sega Mega Drive Classics compilation for PlayStation 4, Xbox One and Steam. So I've been spending a bit of time with that recently. It's a really nice collection. There's a couple of minor little flaws here and there, but for the most part, I mean, it performs really nicely. It's very customizable. It's got 50 great games in it, including a bunch of treasure stuff that you don't see very often, which makes Chris very excited.
Yes.
And yeah, it's a really nice compilation, and it just got me thinking about game preservation and why we might collect things and what's going to happen to things in the future, basically, especially with some of the things that happen with modern consoles and so on. So I think thinking specifically about this compilation that's come out, I find it quite interesting that the Mega Drive, or the Genesis to you Americans out there, is the console that always seems to get this treatment more than any other. I mean, we know that Nintendo have done things like the NES Mini and the SNES Mini and so on, and they've had Virtual Console and so on, but it's always the Mega Drive that gets these retail releases of games that are sort of the classics of the 90s and so on, and it's I find it quite interesting that that's the console that always seems to get latched onto for this. To a lesser extent, there's the Atari 2600 gets a bit of that treatment as well, but as I said in my rundown of this piece of software the other day, that you can tell when a console generation has reached maturity because it will have a Mega Drive Classics compilation for it at some point.
Yeah, so. Every console. I think a lot of it comes down, not necessarily in terms of the Genesis or the Mega Drive or whatever you want to call it, but it's Sega in general. I think Sega as a company, and this is kind of something we touched upon a couple weeks ago when we had a discussion about Sega, more than any other big publisher out there, I think Sega has a specific connection with their past and preservation of their past that other people aren't interested in engaging with in the same way. It all kind of boils down to, Sega backwards is ages, and they've always pushed that. Like, even I think back to the PS2, it wasn't something we got much in the West. We just got one compilation disc with many of them on it. But in the PS2 era in Japan, Sega had this huge Sega Ages collection, revisiting all their major properties, either remaking them in new modern 3D versions or simply porting them onto compilation disc. And this is all kinds of stuff. We're not just talking about Sonic the Hedgehog here. We're talking about, there was a Wonder Boy disc in Japan, remakes of Fantasy Zone, remakes of Space Harrier, other arcade stuff. They've just always been interested in revamping and touching on their past in a way that doesn't always happen with other publishers. I don't know why it is, but it's just something they're interested in.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to bring up, because there are some publishers over here in the West in particular that certainly used to be interested in this sort of thing, and they don't seem to be up for it anymore. I'm thinking probably the most prominent example of that is Activision. Because if we think back to maybe sort of the PS2 era or so, and before that as well, Activision was big on preserving its past, particularly things like its Atari 2600 games and things like the adventure games it published. There were all sorts of Activision compilations available where you could get all their old games and you could revisit them, but that seems something that they're not at all interested in now. And I'm not entirely sure why that is, because those games are still very well regarded, especially among people who were sort of around for the first time. And there's also kind of a gap in the market for them as well, because if we think about the Atari 2600 games in particular, every time an Atari 2600 compilation comes out, it's pretty much always the same games. It's always the first party Atari games for the most part. And so those Activision games are kind of ripe to be re-exploited, if you like. So I mean, there's a great PSP version of them. I think there's a PS2 version as well, but since then I don't think they've done anything with those old properties, and that's a bit sad really, because Activision certainly in the early days was a defining influence in video games. I mean, they basically sort of established formulas for a lot of different formats of games, like scrolling shoot 'em ups and that kind of thing. There's stuff like River Raid. They were noteworthy for having a lot of the first female designers in the business. Going back to River Raid again, which is one of my favourite games, so I'll bring that up quite a lot. That was designed by Carol Shaw. That did a lot with procedural generation and that sort of thing. So from a historical perspective, those games are fascinating, but there's no real way of getting them now. aside from getting one of these compilations on an old console or just investing in an old console and collecting them.
Yeah, I mean that's a gap in my knowledge for sure. Most of my knowledge in terms of game development history is pretty much focused on the Japanese market. But I mean, you're 100% right about all those old Atari games and stuff from Activision. I remember very specifically picking up a 2600 collection and being kind of disappointed that there weren't as many or any Activision titles on it. Some of the ones I was looking for that I had from my 2600 growing up.
Yeah, so I mean that's one side of things. There have been attempts to sort of bring some of those back. Like, I don't know if you remember the Xbox Game Room service on the 360.
I read about it, but I don't have any personal first-hand experience with it.
Yeah, Game Room was actually really cool because it gave you this sort of virtual arcade space to play in. It was very much driven by sort of I'm not sure I want to say microtransactions, because you were basically buying the games rather than sort of paying for credits or that sort of thing. Although I think there was an option to pay for credits to play a certain game a certain number of times, although quite why anyone would do that is beyond me. But yeah, one of the interesting things about Game Room is it was one of those few places that did incorporate some of these old Activision games as well. Because Microsoft was completely sort of separate from the companies who normally put out these sort of compilations. It wasn't just Activision itself putting out the Game Room service, it was Microsoft licensing these games to be included in here. That was actually one of the best retro game collections there was, because it had contributions from all sorts of different sources, including the ones that tend not to get a lot of attention these days. So it was a bit sad when that shut down, but I guess it just wasn't paying the bills, as it were.
Yeah, I wonder why. I mean, you could probably make some arguments into like the Xbox install base and where their attentions lie versus other consoles install bases, but that would require a lot more research in order to make things that aren't sweeping generalizations, so I won't.
So, I mean, with regard to game preservation in general, for me, there's a lot of different things we need to think about. So, first of all, there's sort of the idea of collecting things, and I know both you and I, we have substantial physical collections of our games. So,
sure.
One thing that's kind of come to light for me over the past few years, in particular, and in the last couple of console generations, is how much sort of value those discs have from a preservation perspective with the current generation of consoles in particular. That's a bit of a concern for me, to be honest, because you get I think probably we've talked about this before. Final Fantasy 15 is probably one of the best examples of this, because I've got a copy of that on my shelf. If I were to revisit that in, I don't know, 20 years time on a PS4 that maybe wasn't necessarily the one I've got right now, that disc would probably be largely useless.
Yeah, all that serves as is a code to tell Squaresoft that you own Final Fantasy 15, so that their servers will let you download Final Fantasy 15 at this point, because the game is so far removed from anything that's on that disc.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I don't play MMOs, because they're not archivable.
Yeah.
So I don't play them.
Although, I mean, the other end of that spectrum is because MMOs aren't archivable, maybe you should play them right now, because you will never get the chance to do that again.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true.
So, and I mean that is something that I've thought about quite a bit, particularly with regard to things like Final Fantasy 11 and Final Fantasy 14. Both of those are going to end someday, and those are both mainline Final Fantasy titles. So it will be a sad day when there are two important parts of the mainline Final Fantasy series that people just won't be able to experience anymore because they're offline.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mixed up 14 and 15. You were talking about 15, and I was like, yes. I don't play 15 because it's an MMO. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You were talking about Noctis and the Boy Crew, not
yes.
14. I'm sorry.
No, but I mean, 15 actually has a lot of the same issues that 14 does in terms of preservation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Most of what I said still applies. Just I did play 15. It's just not. I just don't want people out there thinking I think 15 is an MMO.
Yeah, I mean it's weird, and I kind of wish they hadn't done it, but they've kind of treated 15 a bit like an MMO in terms of its content updates.
I have no doubt that one day there will be a complete 15 disc. They just actually have to finish 15, which is apparently going to happen in 2019 now. I have no idea.
Yeah, so, but I mean, up until that happens, you have no idea of whether or not you're going to be able to preserve that game for the future. Because at the minute, you've got the option of getting the original version, which, I mean, in its basic state on the disc, if you don't have an internet access or if PSN goes down or whatever, it is sort of playable. Mm-hmm. I've seen people who have deliberately downgraded their version of Final Fantasy 15 to play the unpatched version, and it is sort of playable. And it's got some hilarious bugs in it as well that people have deliberately tried to seek out. So, I mean, I suppose there's a certain amount of value in preserving that experience, but in terms of the patched experience, with all the additions they've made to it over the last couple of years or so, it's very difficult to know how best to handle that as a collector, as someone who wants to preserve that experience.
Yeah, it's something I wrestle with quite a bit. I've mentioned on previous episodes, but I'm just not a guy who deals well with DLC and patches and stuff, because this, what we're talking about today is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm a trained historian. It's what my bachelor's degree is in history, and my master's degree is in popular culture, with a specific focus on the exploration of historical popular culture and what it means for us. So it's like the idea of always having media artifacts available in a playable or interact in a state that we can interact with and enjoy it is really important to me. I tend not to respect or engage with games that are heavy with DLC, because I prefer my media artifacts to be complete self-contained things that can be archived for future generations. It's one of the reasons, as I mentioned earlier, I did not buy the Wii U version of Hyrule Warriors. And I handle most games that way. I'm just playing Dark Souls 2 now because I acquired a copy of Scholar of the First Sin, which is the complete with DLC version. If a game comes out and I see it's going to be DLC heavy, I don't buy that game. I wait 2 years. The only reason I didn't do that with Final Fantasy 15 is because it's freaking Final Fantasy and I had to play it. But I played Final Fantasy 15 through based on what was on the disc. I have not engaged with any of the DLC or additional content, even the additional content that's been patched in later that wasn't DLC. Like I haven't fired it back up to try like the all-terrain vehicle or the boat or like whatever the things they've added for free have been. Like in my mind, those things do not exist. They will exist when they've been pressed on a disc for me to buy.
Yeah, no, I'm exactly the same. I mean, I covered Final Fantasy 15 shortly after it came out over on MoeGamer, and that was the experience as it was at the time. So as you say, all that stuff was missing. So you could only play as Noctis, you could only drive on the roads, there weren't boats, there weren't DLC. Yeah, there was none of that. So if I fired up Final Fantasy 15 now, I would have a very different experience to what I did when I wrote about that game, which in some respects is quite interesting, and in some respects I quite want to do at some point. But the other side of things, when you're trying to take a snapshot of popular culture and media at that point in time, I mean, where do you take that from? Mm-hmm. if it's going to constantly change like that, if it's one creative work that is constantly changing, where do you draw the line? Where do you take that snapshot from? It's a difficult consideration, and it's one that's come up in the last two console generations, really. Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. I mean, they had patches on things. I don't think any of them were anywhere near as drastic as what we get these days. Yeah. I mean, even this Mega Drive collection that I got for PS4. Before I could run it, there was a 1.2 gigabyte update.
I think that added the multiplayer, the online multiplayer.
Yeah, 1.2 gigabyte update for a pack of Mega Drive games.
Yeah, are the games on that even 1.2 gigabyte? Like, is 50 Genesis games 1.2? Like, what's pressed on the disc might not be that big.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah.
I don't know. Anyway. I mean, the ultimate nightmare is of course, as a tribute games fan, right? What happened back in the PS3 and Xbox 360 with the Scott Pilgrim beat-em-up game.
Oh, yes. This was one of the other points I was going to bring up, is the fact that there are games that are now dead.
Yeah.
As in completely dead. Like, we're not talking like an MMO where you can grab the game disc and you can extract the files and you can hack it to play it offline or whatever. No, there are games that you just cannot get anymore because there is no means of downloading them aside from resorting to questionable means.
Yeah,
which, in this case, it is fortunate that there are people out there who have supplied these questionable means for us to provide those games. But yeah, the fact that you can't buy and download Scott Pilgrim, Afterburner Climax, and any number of other games that have had this same treatment it's a crying shame, because the ones that it happens to have been fantastic games as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's when my first PlayStation 3 died, it died after Scott Pilgrim was taken off the store, the PlayStation store. I was able to get it, but the hoops you have to go through to get it are crazy.
Yeah. You
have to go into your PlayStation account. You have to go into your downloads list, which is sorted historically, like by date, and you have to find that thing. You can't go into the store and find it anymore. You actually have to scroll through your entire history of downloads, find it, and access it through there. Like, legally, you've paid for that product. Like, they have to let you access it somehow. But, it took me, an hour just to be able to download it again.
Yeah. This is one area that Steam does quite well with, actually, because stuff that has been removed from Steam generally stays in your library, so that you can re-download it, and Steam is quite easy to sort in terms of you can sort it into categories, or you can sort it alphabetically or by playtime or whatever. So I'm thinking things like the PC version of Blur, which is the racing game I mentioned earlier. A lot of the people who went on to work on the Sonic racing games worked on. That was an amazing game, but for whatever reason, it got removed from Steam. So, one, you can't buy it anymore. As far as I know, the only way you can now buy a copy of Blur on PC is to get a hard copy of it, and good luck with that. And also, it means that you can't make use of the multiplayer stuff.
Yeah.
Which, but that game is still there. It is still preserved digitally, which is a good thing to an extent. But what happens if Steam closes? I mean, it's unlikely to happen, but if Steam shuts down, what's going to happen to that copy of that game?
Yeah, I mean,
is it going to be able to run if it's not connected to the Steam servers? Because I know some Steam games make use of DRM to authenticate on the Steam servers when you try and play them, and they won't run offline at all. Others will just run, and they will just make use of the Steam overlay and that sort of thing. And Steam does have a backup feature, but it's buried quite deep within menus and stuff, and it's not entirely clear how it does things. This is one area that I like GOG.com in particular a lot more, because even if you're using the GOG.com client Galaxy, every single thing you download from GOG.com, you can get a DRM-free installer for. And that means that at any point, all of the stuff you bought on there, you can back up. You can burn it to a CD. You can make your own physical copies of them. In fact, I've done that a few times, guys. So I'm just that sad.
You've made nice cases for them and stuff, though, right? Don't you put them up on your?
Yeah, exactly. So like, I wanted stuff like Trails in the Sky and Ease on my shelf. And there are no physical versions of that apart from the first Trails in the Sky game on PSP. So, what am I to do? I'll make my own boxes. There we go. And GOG.com provides you with the ability to do that, which is nice. So, if I wanted to go and find, say, the Japanese box art for those games, I could do that, or I could design my own boxes and so on. But the important thing is I've got some physical means of preserving that game. So, if for whatever reason I'm no longer able to access my digital copies of them, they are preserved safely, which is something that I have started to feel increasingly strongly about as I've started to get older.
Now, what do you burn on that disc? Just like the installer that you download from GOG?
Yeah, so as I say, the GOG.com, you can download stuff through their client, which means that it'll sort of install it automatically like Steam does. But there is an option in there to download a standalone installer, which is just a single executable file that contains all of the game data. You stick that on a CD, run it, it will ask you where you want to install it, and it just extracts the game and puts it there. There's no protection or anything like that.
The good old days.
Yeah, exactly. So, for preserving stuff, that is for me, probably the ideal solution at the minute. Obviously, it's very easy for one person to buy a game from GOG.com and then share that executable file with people because there's no protection on it or anything like that. Not that I condone that, of course, but that seems like the most consumer-friendly way of doing that at the moment. That keeps collectors happy, it gives people flexibility, and it also covers themselves for the future as well. I don't know if you remember a few years back when GOG went through something of a relaunch, and as part of their relaunch they pulled this fucking stupid publicity stunt where they claimed that the whole site was being shut down and that no one would be able to access any of their games anymore. Do you remember that?
No, I can't say that I do. My experience with GOG is pretty limited.
Yeah, no, but yeah, this was a disastrous publicity stunt for them. I mean, in some respects, it got people talking about GOG, and when they came back with their new catalogue and so on, and they weren't just doing retro games anymore, yeah, everyone was like, oh, right, that's what you were doing. But at the time, people were furious, because this was really the first example that people had encountered of a pretty high-profile digital store apparently going down and losing all of the things that people had paid money for. So yeah, I mean, the reaction to that is kind of what scares me with digital only games and stuff like that. Yeah. And it's why I like to make an effort to preserve things that are currently out there in the digital only format. I mean, another good example is something like Fate's Day Night, which has never got an official Western release. The fan translated version that is out there at the moment, which is the most sort of commonly accepted canonical version, if you like, that never got a physical release in Japan either, apart from on Vita, I think, and that obviously had all the adults only content cut out from it. So in many ways, the digital fan translated English version of this is the definitive version of Fate's Day Night, and yet it is currently dependent on people continuing to host it. So yeah, of course I burn that to some disc, because that is a genuine classic that I don't want to be lost.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy how much work we have to put into it and how much brain power we have to put into making sure we have access to these things still. But I don't know, maybe we think too much about it. A long time ago there was a discussion about this stuff in regards to maybe games have always been meant to be transient. The end user license agreement on games is that you don't technically own it.
Yeah.
That's always, there was that huge debate around used games, whether or not used games are even technically legal, because when you purchase a game, all you're really purchasing is the ability to the license to use that software. Technically, you don't actually own anything when you own a video game. You just own the license to use that software.
I just think that's a bit of a sad, cynical view to take, though, because there is so much interesting stuff in gaming throughout the ages. I mean, not just from the sort of technological perspective, but there are stories that have been told in games that haven't had remakes. There are interesting mechanics that haven't been explored in other ways. There's all sorts of stuff. And just the idea of these things being lost just because someone didn't feel the need to preserve them in some way is just a bit sad to me. And
it terrifies me.
Yeah, I think of the room I've got upstairs, which is full of Atari ST games and Atari 8-bit games, most of which still work perfectly well. And then I look at things like the PS4 games in particular are my biggest concern, for the reasons we outlined before. And it's like, how many of those are going to be playable in a few years' time?
Yeah, I mean, I do my best to keep on top of limited run and special reserve and all those guys, but if I bought everything I wanted to buy from them, I wouldn't even be able to make my student loan payments. I just had to pass on Cosmic Star Heroine because I just didn't have $35 to do it. That hurt. That hurt because that was one I would have liked to have preserved, but sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
And the historian in me even drives my decision making. Even I've bought games off of limited run that I haven't even really wanted to play that much. I bought Bit Trip Presents Runner 2, and I own that on 3 different platforms. I didn't really want to spend $30 on it again, but I bought it just to preserve it because the historian in me was I like this game, I've played this game, I respect this game. I don't really want a physical PS4 version of this game. I've already played it enough on Steam, but I bought it anyway because out of respect and the desire to preserve.
No, I mean, I'm exactly the same. The reason I do so much console gaming these days rather than PC gaming, despite having a PC that is more than up to running sort of the most demanding games at the moment, is purely for this reason. It's because I see a game that I'm interested in. I want to feel like I own it. I want to have a copy of it on my shelf. I want to be able to show it to people. I want to be able to talk about it. And if it's just in your Steam library, I mean, one, it runs the risk of being forgotten completely, because I've got so many things in my Steam library that have been in there for so long that I just don't look at anymore. I just don't even know they're there.
I've gotten to the point with my Steam library where I've went to buy games and I realized I had them all.
Yes, we've all been there. It's like, oh, I own that. Yeah, okay.
Sometimes I'm just giving out, like when I buy a Humble bundle, like the extent to which I just have doubles to dole out to everybody at this point.
Yeah. So I mean, it's difficult to know exactly what the solution's going to be at this point, and it's kind of sad to say that piracy is probably going to be a big part of this in the future.
I emulate unapologetically.
Yeah, exactly.
I have every Neo Geo game ever. I run it in an emulator. Like, come at me, SNK. Like what? like what? I can't go out there and spend $400 on the aftermarket to get a copy of Tengai Makyo. I'm gonna emulate, and of course I'm going to do what I can to also support official stuff. Like, I'm gonna buy that Neo Geo Mini because it's got 50 games on it, but the 50 games on it are just the SNK games.
Yeah,
Blazing Star isn't on it. Like I said, Tengai Makyo Chojin is not on it. Even important SNK games aren't on it. Turf Masters isn't on it. I can't imagine owning a Neo Geo collection that doesn't have Turf Masters. So, I emulate because I want to be able to play those games. I want to be able to show friends of mine who aren't familiar with those games to those games.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to continue to educate and share this hobby with people, and sometimes I have to emulate to do that.
Yeah, and whatever the sort of legal questions over this, I think it's really good that there's this sort of community that is built up around this idea of helping to preserve things. So one thing I want to give a particular highlight to here is Launchbox.
Oh, I love Launchbox.
Yeah, Launchbox is a wonderful piece of software. If you've never come across it, it's basically sort of like iTunes for your games, really. You can import your ROM files and disk images and so on for pretty much any platform you'd care to mention, and probably plenty that you haven't thought of as well. You can link it to your various emulators, so you can use it as a launcher for them. It's connected to the internet, so it will retrieve information on the games automatically for you, so it will give you things like a synopsis and wallpaper and background music and all sorts. The full registered version of the software has a big box mode, a big screen mode that you can use for if you're building like a custom arcade cabinet or something like that. So there are people out there who are aware that this is probably how we're going to have to do things in the future for certain console generations or certain hard to find things. It's just, there's the whole sort of slightly awkward feeling about it all. It's like, is it okay to be doing this? Yeah.
Anyway, I don't ever feel any moral compunction about doing it because I buy so much.
Yeah,
it's like I don't know how else to justify it. It's like, okay, so I'm emulating Adventures of Dino Ricky on the NES because I can't find a copy at a price I'm willing to pay. What are you gonna? We were talking about the Genesis collection that just came out, right? You can now own Alien Soldier in the West. Treasure's Alien Soldier, one of the greatest side scrollers ever made. Treasure's Alien Soldier. Previously, copies of Alien Soldier starting cart only were talking about around $200. Dialed all the way from box only in condition, $400 to $600. Was I ever gonna pay that? No, because the aftermarket's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Have I emulated Alien Soldier for 10 years? Yes.
Of course.
Am I going to buy that Genesis collection now so I can officially, legally own a copy of Alien Soldier? Of course I am, because it's a reasonable price. But, there reaches a point where the intersection of the aftermarket, I cannot justify what it takes to pay for these games. I don't want to turn this into a huge emulation moral discussion, but from a historical perspective, you've got to do what you've got to do to have access to these titles. Yeah,
and I mean, thinking about Shantae, which I'm covering this next month, a cart only for that. The Game Boy Color game goes for like at least £300 if you could find a copy. And so, for example, I'm playing it through on emulation now. I bought a copy of the 3DS Virtual Console version to kind of make myself feel a little bit better about it.
Sure.
But also emulation has got the added benefits of making it easy to share the experience with people as well. So, for example, something like the 3DS or the DS or the Game Boy, something like that, is very hard to do things like stream or record video from, or even take screenshots from. Whereas if you've got an emulated version, you can do all those things. You can highlight these games in ways that we haven't been able to do in the past. So, like, I could take a video capture of Shantae right now and show someone exactly what it looks like, how it plays, and that sort of thing. Whereas, sort of pre-internet or pre-widespread social media, high-speed internet, that sort of thing, that would have been impossible to do. And so people would have had to sort of take it on faith that this game was supposedly worth £300, which totally isn't. But, you know, it's a great game. I'm not paying £300 for it.
Well, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, emulation is kind of the elephant in the room that everyone knows exists, but nobody really wants to give lip service to. I'm not afraid to talk about it. But, you know, okay, YouTube streamers, right? So there's loads of YouTube streams. I'll just keep on Alien Soldier, right? Because it's pertinent right now. There's a million YouTube streams out there of people like doing perfect runs of Alien Soldier. So you're telling me every streamer out there who is doing YouTube streams of Alien Soldier has a $200 to $400 copy of the Japanese version of Alien Soldier, and they're all running that through in a Genesis, I'm assuming, through and the quality's great on other Steams, right? So they're running it through a FrameMeister, which is a $400 piece of upscaler, with a $60 SCART cable into another $100 recording device. Like, you're telling me that these people who are playing Alien Soldier made that like $900 investment to play this game? Like, no, they didn't. They're running it on an emulator. Like, and it's right out there for the public to see.
Yeah, and I think the other side of things is that we are at a point, and have been for quite some time, that emulation is now at such an advanced state that the only real thing you're getting from playing on original hardware is the satisfaction of holding that original hardware in your hand. The actual experience of the game itself is so authentic on emulation these days that, yeah, you are getting that true game experience, which you didn't always used to get, but certainly up to at least PS1, N64, maybe PS2, you can have an authentic and in some cases superior experience with emulation. Yeah,
PS2 is still a little rough depending on your build of your computer, but and I know GameCube emulation is in a very good state right now.
Yes,
I don't remember the name of it, but there's that emulator that supposedly runs Wii U and GameCube stuff beautifully. I kind of draw the line with emulation at disc-based media for some reason. Like, I have PS2 and PS1 and Saturn emulators, but I never download or play ROMs. I only actually play my disc games in the computer, or make image files of my own disc games to play. For some reason, I'm comfortable emulating cartridge-based stuff, but I draw the line at disc-based stuff.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. The only exception to that is in the few cases in the PS1 era in particular, where there was stuff that was only released in the US that didn't come to Europe.
Sure.
So there is an English version out there, but just I have no means of acquiring it easily without spending hundreds of pounds on it.
Yeah.
As you say, I tend to pretty much draw the line at cart-based stuff. So I think the latest stuff I have emulated in my copy of Launchbox is I've got a couple of N64 things in there, but it's mostly sort of 8 and 16-bit stuff.
There is potentially an N64 mini coming. Nintendo. The news this week was that Nintendo registered N64 for whatever they call it, TV game devices or whatever that like copyright like red flag is.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one, I think, because the N64 is one that people seem to have fairly mixed feelings about, because there are some great games on it by all means, but as a console platform, it's one that's and it's hard to describe really. People have very fond memories of stuff like Super Mario 64 and so on, but you don't have people who have quite the same amount of nostalgia for the N64 as they do for the PS1, in my experience anyway.
I just do for mischief makers. Pretty much everything else on the N64 is kind of take it or leave it for me. And Mario 64, obviously. Most of the stuff on 64 that I really am in love with has already been preserved or re-released in other fashions.
Yeah, that's true.
If I play Mario 64 these days, I play it on the DS.
Yeah. Yeah, so, well, I mean, that'll be another one for Nintendo to not make enough of and annoy everyone, so, you know. This is how these things tend to go. All right, any further thoughts on this topic?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I could talk about it for a long time. There's a million good collections out there, but I don't think we're going to make any revelations that we haven't hit already.
No, absolutely. So, like I say, this new Sega Mega Drive Classics collection is a very good one. If you have got things like the one that was available on 360 and PS3, it's still worth picking up because although there's a lot of overlap between the libraries in the two collections, there's also enough unique stuff between the two that make it worth having as well. Yes. Particularly as you're surely keen to highlight the treasure stuff, but there's a few other bits and bobs in there as well. Things like the Wonder Boy games we haven't seen on these compilations before. I don't think.
Yes.
So yeah, it's really nice to see those. It's nice to see a slightly different mix of games as usual. It's sad that we haven't got Sonic 3 there, but to be honest, there's enough other ways of playing Sonic 3 these days that I don't really miss it all that much because I've got at least 3 copies of Sonic 3 on various discs around my shelves already. So yeah, so while it's a bummer it's not on this collection, it's not as if there is no way of playing Sonic 3 these days. Alright, so that's another episode done and dusted. So, do you want to tell people where to find you on the internet, Chris?
Sure. You can check me out on my website. It's mrgilderpixels.com, mrgilderpixels.com, or on Instagram or Tumblr as Mr. Gilder Pixels, where I share a lot of work in progress, artwork and stuff.
Marvellous. And you can find me at MoeGamer.net as always. At the time of recording, I've just finished covering Galgun 2 for the cover game for May. And as I've said a couple of times previously in this episode, next we're moving on to the Shantae series. So we're going to be looking at a whole thing from the Game Boy Color original right up until the recent Ultimate Edition release of Half Genie Hero. So that should be a really interesting series to take a look at. So thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.